So if we play our game and we run around like we can here, those of you who have played a lot of first-person games might notice that you can't jump, and that feels kind of restrictive, and it's not something that I think aligns with the way that most of us think about first-person games. We can kind of ramp off and stuff. In fact, that's kind of fun. Yeah, that's fun. But we want to actually be able to jump. Because jumping is crucial to, getting around things like this box, for example. This very easily in a normal game we'd be able to jump over this stuff, but we obviously can't. So what we're going to do is go ahead and stop playing. We're going to open up our player controller here. And at the very top, we're going to add a couple variables. So we're going to add some space. We're going to say public float jump force. We're going to set that equal to 100. And then we're going to say public layer mask LM. And I'll explain that a little bit further in a second. We're going to say capsule collider call. And that's just shorthand for collider there. And now we're going to go into our start method here, and we're going to say call is equal to get component angled brackets capsule collider, and then the open and close parentheses. And now we're going to scroll down to the bottom here, and we're going to add a new method. We're going to hit enter, or actually I already have some space, but if you don't have space, you can hit enter after the close bracket for process input. We're going to say void try jump, open and close parentheses and our brackets. And this is because we want to try to jump. We might not necessarily be able to. So we want to say if, which an if is a conditional. We want to give it a Boolean value. Booleans being variables that either are true or false. And if it's true, it executes this code. And if it's false, it will either continue, or if there's an else statement, it'll do what's in the else. We won't have an else in this one, but we will have something in our true condition. And we're going to say if physics, with a capital P, dot raycast. And we're going to be using a lot of raycasts in this project, so we'll explain raycasts a little bit later on. But what's important to know is it basically is just, it shoots like what's essentially like a little laser beam out, and if it hits something, it gives you information about what it hits, like where that thing is, what that thing is, and how far that is from where we're firing the ray. So we get to pick where that fires from. We're going to do that by saying raycast, and then inside the parentheses saying transform.position. That's going to tell the ray to fire from where our player is positioned. We're going to send it in a direction, the down direction, by saying vector3.down. We're going to say, and again, put commas. Make sure you have commas between the position and this vector3. We're going to say comma call.height over 2. Because we're actually shooting this ray down to the ground to detect if we are currently standing on the ground. We only want the player to be able to jump if they're on the ground. So we need to make this raycast check if we're on the ground for us, rather than using something like the player or the default character controller checking grounded state for us. So we're going to say call height over 2, which is the distance from the center of our player, where transform.position is, down half of our height, which would be where the ground should be. But we're going to add 0.1f to that, and that's just to make sure that we will actually hit the ground if we're standing on it. Sometimes things can be a little buggy if you don't give it that extra little bit of leeway. So we're going to say if that, and then comma lm. We're going to use that layer mask variable that we established up top. And then we're going to add our open and close parentheses here. Make sure, or curly brackets, excuse me. Make sure we have the parentheses for the raycast closed. So you should have 2 parentheses at the end here, and then your curly brackets. And if that is true, if we're hitting the ground with that, we're going to say rigid.jump, rigid.add force, and then open and close parentheses, 0, comma, jump force, comma 0. And that's going to add our a force equal to that jump force we established earlier in the y direction. That is to move it up. Now we want to move up into process input, and after our move dir semicolon here, we're going to hit enter a couple times. We're going to say if input.get key down, and then open and close parentheses, key code.space. Make sure we use a capital S there, and then enter, try, jump, open and close parentheses, and semicolon. And so now, whenever we're playing, if we hit the space key, it's going to try to jump, which means it's going to fire this raycast downward, and if it hits the ground, then it'll allow us to jump. So before we can actually use that, we just have to go into our player game object here, and we're going to see that layer mask currently selects nothing. What that means is that when the raycast fires, it's not actually going to check for anything on our physics system, and that's a problem because we need it to detect the ground. So in order to get it to detect the ground, we're going to hit this terrain object here, this terrain layer, and then we're going to make sure that's the only one we have selected. Oops, don't select it twice because it'll unselect it. But make sure that check mark is next to terrain. We can click off of it. And now if we hit play, we start moving around. WASD works just perfectly. And if we hit enter, or space I mean, you'll see that we jump. I think this jump value is a little low, so I'm going to hit the escape key and stop playing. An important thing to note is if you just hit escape and change values directly here, like I think I'm going to increase it to 500. I think that's, maybe that's a little high, but you know, pick a number that works for you. But an important thing to note is if we make that change while we're still in play mode, if you watch that variable, when I stop playing, it's going to switch back to 100. So whenever you want to permanently adjust a variable, make sure you're not in play mode, as in you're not playing the game, and then go in and adjust it. I think I'm going to settle at 300. Judging by how floaty 500 felt, I think 300 will feel good. Yeah, I think that's a good jump height. And now we can jump around everywhere. And yeah, I think that looks good. Feel free to play with the value and find one that you think works well for your game. If you want to be able to jump up and bonk your head on the top of the ceiling with every spacebar key, go for it. Go crazy. Figure out what you think is the most fun, and you can adjust it as you continue on in the project. You can adjust it and make sure that it matches where you feel the game is at any given point in time. Of course, once you're done with that, make sure you save your scene with Control S or in the File menu.